Okay, so welcome everyone to our event. This is actually the second World Summit for Social Development Solution Session. And we are here actually in Doha, Qatar. And this event is Human Rights Education as a solution to support social integration and advance gender equality. I want to see if by raise of hands, how many people know what human rights education is? And just if, not to unmute, but just if you have the hand feature, just raise your hand. Just curious to know how many in the room know what human rights education is. I don't see that many hands. So this is a question actually that's we asked during one of the UN, the sessions, a commission on the status of women a couple of years ago, and there were over 100 people in the room and only 5 hands went up. And we thought, wow, this is a critical issue to talk about, human rights education, specifically as it relates to gender equality and women's empowerment. And women's and girls' empowerment, in fact. So again, I'd like to welcome you, and I would like to also appreciate the co-sponsors. We actually have co-sponsors from the permanent mission of the UN from Slovenia, and also the Philippines, and the NGO Working Group on Human Rights Education and Learning, as well as NGO Committee on the Status of Women, New York, and of course, oh my goodness, I should have started with you first, the United Nations Human Rights Office of the High Commissioner, who have actually co-organized this with us for we've held many planning meetings and have developed this concept note together. Great appreciation to OHCHR and the big team there that has been supporting this. And so I would like to, first of all, start the program with opening remarks by the Undersecretary of Severo Catura of the Philippines, of the Human Rights Committee Secretariat, and they have sent a video message.
Good day, everyone. Human rights education, or simply HRE, is more than a lesson or a policy goal. It is, in truth, a way of life. It teaches empathy, respect, and equality in how we think, how we speak, and how we act towards others. When we look at education through the lens of human rights, gender equality no longer appears as a separate advocacy. It becomes the natural result of justice being lived and dignity being upheld. The United Nations Declaration on Human Rights Education and Training reminds us that a universal culture of human rights is the foundation of democracy itself. Within that culture, gender equality is a measure of progress, affirmed by the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, or CEDAW, and echoed in the Sustainable Development Goals, particularly Goals number 4 and 5. In our own region, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, or ASEAN, has followed the same path. The ASEAN Human Rights Declaration, together with the work of the ASEAN Commission on the Promotion and Protection of the Rights of Women and Children, has helped weave gender perspectives into the fabric of education and governance. The ASEAN University Network on Human Rights Education complements this by embedding human rights and gender sensitivity in teaching, research, and community work, shaping a generation that thinks critically, acts ethically, and serves responsibly. Here in the Philippines, human rights education has grown well beyond the classroom. Through the Gender and Development, or the GAD framework, every government agency is required to dedicate at least 5% of its budget to programs that promote gender equality, women's empowerment, and human rights-based governance. Our independent national human rights institution, the Commission on Human Rights of the Philippines, in partnership with our Department of Education, Civil Service Commission, and Commission on Higher Education, continues to integrate these principles into both academic curricula and public service training. For its part, the Presidential Human Rights Committee, under the Office of the President of the Republic, the Secretariat of which I manage as its Executive Director, ensures that HRE remains aligned with the 4th Philippine Human Rights Plan for 2024 to 2028, connecting education, policy, and accountability in one coherent national direction. We know, however, that challenges remain. Conversations on gender roles, identity, and discrimination can still be uncomfortable, often requiring sensitivity and courage. These are not easy topics to raise, yet they must be raised. Because while laws can change systems, only education can truly change people. If we are to make gender equality real through human rights education, then 3 things must happen. First, we must mainstream HRE across all disciplines, not as a standalone subject, but as a guiding principle for citizenship and governance. Second, we must equip our teachers and institutions with the tools and confidence to address prejudice and gender-based violence wherever they appear. And third, we must build strong partnerships across government, civil society, academia, and the media to ensure that awareness leads to participation and participation leads to change. Transformation begins when citizens see equality not as a privilege but as principle, and gender fairness not as concession but as conviction. We thank the organizers and co-sponsors of this activity for creating this space for dialogue, and all of you for taking part in it. Each conversation brings us closer to a society where every person, woman or man, lives with dignity, equality, and respect. We pray for a productive and meaningful solution session. Thank you very much. Maraming salamat po.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Katura, for that. We will start with our panel discussion. Actually, since our program is only an hour long, everything is condensed, which is why I also kept my words quite short, because I would like to hear from panelists. And so I would like to welcome all of them to the screen, and I'm going to share a short bio for each of them as they join. So today we are joined by now 4 panelists, and first is Bushra Elias, and she's the coordinator of the Human Rights Education Unit at the United Nations Training and Documentation Center for Southwest Asia and the Arab region of OHCHR. And Bushra has more than 17 years of experience in different domains in development, humanitarian, and human rights fields. She holds a Master of Advanced Studies in Humanitarian Action from the University of Geneva and the Graduate Institute. And she worked with different national and international organizations in Lebanon. Her focus is on protection of children and youth, as well as youth empowerment and gender inclusion. And we have also Bandana Rana from Nepal, who's an expert member of the UN CEDAW committee since 2017. And she's the co-chair of the Working Group on Women, Peace and Security, and General Recommendation 41 on gender stereotypes. And her experience spans 3 decades of active engagement in promoting women's rights and gender equality through the different organizations and networks she's founded and led. And she's worked from the grassroots to the national, regional, and global levels, leading advocacy, research, and public outreach and community mobilization programs. And her 3 decades of dedicated work has been on violence against women, gendered conflict transformation, peace building, and engendered media. She's the former chair of the National Women's Commission of Nepal, and she's the chair of the Global Network of Women Peace Builders. And we are also gathered here. She is currently, in Nepal, and Michelle is joining us from Brazil. She's a human rights educator, journalist, and the founder and executive director of the Aurora Institute for Human Rights Education, which was established in 2018 to promote and defend human rights education. Throughout her career, she has worked for the delegation of the European Union in Brazil as a consultant focused on gender equality, and has been collaborating with the Brazilian government through the Aurora Institute as a consultant, leading trainings and projects on human rights, minority rights, and restorative justice. And with 20 years of experience in the field of social projects, Michelle is driven by the tangible possibility of transforming realities through people's engagement and dialogue. She has a master's in human rights and public policy from the Pontifical Catholic University of Paraná, and was a Rotary Peace Fellow at, I won't try to pronounce in Thailand, Chulalongkorn. Maybe that's how it is. Her research interests are in human rights, peace, education, identities, gender equality, and minority rights. And Elisa Gassotti, a colleague of mine, is a UN representative for human rights education for Soka Gakkai International, based in Geneva, and is a committed human rights advocate. Since 2018, she's chaired the NGO Working Group on Human Rights Education and Learning, and she previously co-chaired the Human Rights Engagement Task Team of the Global Protection Cluster led by UNHCR, and has worked with FAO in Italy and UNDP Jordan. Elisa holds an executive master's in international humanitarian law from the Geneva Academy and a master's in international relations at the Università degli Studi di Pavia. Okay, so that is their bios, and I didn't share anything about myself other than to say that, I mean, I think it's obvious. I work for Soka Gakkai International. I'm also a UN representative based in New York, and I'm the representative for gender equality and women's empowerment. And I was the former co-chair, together with Pamela, who you're going to hear from later, but the NGO Committee on the Status of Women in New York. And really, this has been something that Elisa and I have really been wanting to do for years. And it's just so wonderful that we can finally, you know, from this event, really, and together working with OHCHR, the other day, actually, we were able to visit Bushra in the human rights. There's a human rights education unit here in Doha, which I was excited to learn about, something that's new and first of its kind, then hopefully will be regional centers all over the world eventually. So I want to hand it over to Bushra, and I have a question for you. And that is, can you give us an overview of the 4th and 5th phase of the World Program on Human Rights Education, with a specific focus on gender equality? And could you share with us any good practice of OHCHR on HRE and gender equality in the region? And as you saw, there weren't that many people who were familiar in general with HRE. So yeah, please give us a background. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy, and good afternoon, everyone from Doha, from the United Nations Training and Documentation Center. It's part of the OHR, as mentioned by Ivy. Just let me thank you, Ivy, and Elisa, for all the coordination for this event to be happening today. Before I answer your questions, just I want to put a bit a framework for the human rights education and where it was mentioned in the conventions. So, for example, I'll be reading some examples. For example, in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, there is a provision in the Article 26 related to the human rights education. In the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, also it was mentioned the human rights education in the Article 7. In the ESCR, the Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well in the Convention of Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, in the Article 10, and of course in the CRC, the rights of the Convention of Rights of Children, as well as in the Convention of the Right of Person with Disabilities. This is just to put a framework where is mentioned the human rights education. Although it's not new, it was provisioned in many conventions. As I see that when you address the question for the participant that what is human rights, or who is familiar with the human rights education, I noticed a few of them raised their hands. So here a question came to my mind: why do we do human rights education? So I think it's important also for the sake of this intervention and panel discussion to highlight and to echo the Undersecretary and what he mentioned as well, that the human rights education is to invest and to empower children and youth on their rights, and to help girls and women to build the knowledge and skills and competencies necessary to proclaim their rights. So it also enables them to be leaders and to engage in the democratic processes and drive positive changes. It allows them also to reflect on the implication of the social and the cultural norms. It enhances their capacity to identify harmful gender biases and to build their confidence and to respond to discriminatory gender norms. Also, the human rights education promotes values, beliefs, and attitudes. It's not only on the level of the knowledge or values, it also aims to change behavior and attitudes. And it encourages all the individual to uphold their rights and those of others. For example, for the human rights education for children and youth, it is an integral part to the right to education, and it's mentioned as well in the Sustainable Development Goal, specifically the Goal 4 of the SDG agenda. Going back to your question, Ivy, as we are the OHCHR, we are, how do I say it? We are, we work on the global coordination for the World Program for the Human Rights Education, which is, it was issued by a General Assembly where the General Assembly on the December 24, 2004, proclaimed the World Program for Human Rights Education and to advance its implementation and the plan of action with the states. So the objective of the World Program for Human Rights Education is to have a common understanding on the basic principle and methodology of human rights education, and to provide concrete framework for action, and to strengthen partnership and cooperation from the international level to the national level. It also provides a practical guidance to states and stakeholders in implementing the objective of the United Nations Declaration on Human Rights and Education and Training that was proclaimed on 2011 by the General Assembly. So the World Program for Human Rights Education, it has many phases, and it started during 2005. We had issued the first plan of action, the first phase, which was specifically addressing the children in a way to integrate human rights education in the primary and secondary school system. And it also it is also the work of the first phase. It continue. It's not only for that period of time from 2005 to 2009. It continues. The second phase was also during the 2010 and 2014, and it was focusing on the higher education and the human rights training for teachers and educators, civil servants, and law enforcement. And the focus was for the student, if we want to take the youth as a part of this phase. The third phase was from 2015 to 2019, and it was focusing on strengthening the implementation of the first two phases and the human rights training for media journalists and professionals. And I think the last two phases are very important, because the focus group for the fourth phase is mainly for the youth, and this continue for the fifth phase, that is now we are working on its plan of action and receiving recommendation and comments from the states on the fifth phase, which is from 2025 till 2029. So the Human Rights Council decided to continue to focus on youth while expanding its work and to include children in this phase. And that's why the member state decided that the fifth phase of the World Program for Human Rights Education to focus mainly on three main thematic issues which are relevant to the youth and children, and which are the digital technology, the environment and climate change, and the gender equality. So this is in brief the phases of the World Program for Human Rights Education. However, in each plan of action, there is four components that highlight how the states could use benefit or make use of this plan of action, and how they can implement each phase. So for example, for the last phase, which is the fifth phase, the plan of action identify four components for effective human rights education on the policy and related implementation measures. For example, states should develop, adopt, and implement and monitor policies fostering human rights education for children and young people. On the second component, teaching and learning processes and tools, the plan of action acknowledged that human rights education for children and youth is necessary to be contextualized and to tackle the needs of their specific needs in their communities, and to be age sensitive in a manner when they are implementing the fifth phase. It also stressed the third component on the training of educator, and I think here the Undersecretary mentioned that the training of educators is also one of the important component to implement the human rights education in the field. And the third or the fourth component is to have an enabling environment where the human rights education take place either in formal or non-formal activities, and this of course it encompasses the physical and virtual space to be expanded to, let's say, everyone who is working with the children and youth, to the parents, to the communities, to the national human rights institution in the countries. So these are in a brief. If the time allows, I can give some example for the, let's say, the implementation of the fourth phase, and how the states respond to implementing the fourth phase. For example, most of the states report that the majority of the states reported that the provision on human rights education were included in the national strategies, they planned and issue laws concerning education. Several states were reporting that the education law and other framework are adopted, and they issued new laws in their policies. Also, it's important to mention that the human rights, the World Program for Human Rights Education, stress on 3 levels for to implement. The first level is on the knowledge and skills. The second level is on the attitudes, and the third level is on the behavior. So we cannot provide human rights education only on the knowledge level. It should be translated into action, into attitudes, wherever the youth or children are, let's say, doing activities related to human rights education. Maybe I can give some practical examples what we are doing in the center. So as you mentioned, Ivy, that in the center we have a specific unit for the human rights education. In this unit, we are working with several stakeholders in the region. So we are a regional center. We work with the 22 Arab countries and the 3 countries from Southwest Asia. In our strategy, we work with the 3 category of people. We work with children, we work with the higher education, and we work with the youth in general. So, and in each component, we have several activities, and we make sure that in each activity, we are including a gender equality perspective, and we make sure that we are mainstreaming the gender equality in our activities. For example, in one of the webinars that we held last year for the youth in the region, it was on the economic inclusion for women in the Arab region. Another example that I can give in our summer course, 1 week intensive summer course on the international human rights system, it is addressed for the students in the Arab region and the youth. In one of the session, we had an advocacy session. During this advocacy session, the presenter put a campaign on the early child marriage for specifically for the girls. And in this campaign, the student and the participant were engaging in to reflect on how the early marriage and how the campaign was spread in the country, and what was the reaction for the people toward this campaign. And the discussion was on this topic. So I think in many activities we make sure that the gender equality perspective is included, specifically now that the 5th phase of the World Program, as I mentioned, one of its theme is on gender equality, and it is how do I say it? It's a very important topic to be addressed. However, in some countries, maybe they misunderstand the gender equality, but I think with raising awareness and with doing sessions or let's say program to integrate human rights for youth and children, it's very important for the people or the states that we are working with. I hope that I answered your question, and I hope that I didn't take that much time, but yeah.
It's very comprehensive. Thank you. And I know you listed all the different various conventions, and I'm about to, introduce Bandana and actually the Beijing Platform for Action, the 4th World Conference of Women. It mentions human rights education specifically 11 times actually throughout. So it's definitely and there was a UN Decade for Human Rights Education, 1995 to 2004. I don't know if everyone knew that. I didn't recognize them. But there's definitely a relationship there. And I say that specifically for those of us who follow the CSW. And so Bandana, I had started by saying that, when we asked the question during CSW, there were very few hands raised. Why is this? Why do you think this is the case? If you can just give your impression on that. And then, I don't know if I should just say all of the questions and then you'll just answer them all together as you like. But also as a CEDAW expert, and I hope everyone knows what CEDAW is, that is the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. And she's in the committee as a member. And what role can HRE play for gender equality? And can you share any examples of successful HRE trainings? So I'll hand it to you. Thank you, Bandana.
Thank you so much, Ivy. It's an honor to be a part of this solution session focusing on human rights education. And you mentioned Beijing, so I would like to reflect on my experience at the Fourth World Conference on Women at Beijing, where I was also present, which was actually a turning point in my activism, where Hillary Clinton declared human rights are women's rights and women's rights are human rights. And at that time, many of us, including myself, did not naturally see the connection between human rights and women's rights. However, today, the feminist movement has evolved and the recognition of human rights education has certainly grown, but it is still not consistently integrated as a strategic tool for activism and social transformation. And that is where your question on CSW also comes, I think. It is the same thing. Because CSW is so far away in New York, for particularly those working on the ground at the local level, it's just a policy, it's just a meeting. And it is not talked about very adequately when you come back from the CSW as a policy that can be integrated in the advocacy, in the education. So probably that is the reason that CSW is considered a bit distant. So while many feminist activists are grounded in principles of justice, equality, and systemic change, human rights education's more formal, lifelong, and structured approach is not always prioritized, especially at the grassroots level. Yet this is precisely where human rights education is most powerful. It builds a shared language of rights, strengthens intergenerational solidarity, and helps dismantle deeply embedded patriarchal norms, and this is important when we consider gender equality, which is an important component, as Bushra said. With rising anti-rights pushback and the persistent rollback on gender equality, integrating human rights education into feminist strategies is not optional, it's very urgent. We need to weave HRE into school curricula, justice sector training, community organizing, and movement building spaces to embed a culture of rights from the ground up. Grassroots women's groups often grasp this intuitively, but lack institutional access and resources. And what's needed now is systematization, investment, and political will to ensure HRE becomes a foundation and not an afterthought for sustainable feminist activism. Now, when you mentioned how can HRE play a vital role for gender equality, as a CEDAW committee member, I see human rights education as a powerful vehicle for realizing both the letter and the spirit of the convention. CEDAW is not just a legal instrument, it's a tool for structural transformation. But its effectiveness depends on how well people, particularly feminists, understand this. And there are many examples that I could have shared of how civil society and feminists engage actively in the CEDAW mechanism through shadow reports, briefings, and consultations, which has led to concrete concluding observations. And these concluding observations have been powerful tools for human rights education integrated advocacy for legislative and policy changes. Article 10C of the CEDAW calls for eliminating gender stereotyping in education, and General Recommendation 36 envisions education as an enabling right that unlocks women's full potential throughout life. And this is where human rights education comes in for gender equality. It bridges legal and lived realities. Progressive gender laws often exist only on paper until people know how to claim and implement them. And human rights education empowers women and girls to advocate for their rights and equips duty bearers to uphold them. HRE also unpacks systemic discrimination. Patriarchy is reinforced not only through institutions, but daily norms and habits, which was also mentioned by Bushra. And HRE exposes and disrupts this cultural conditioning, whether it is in schools, homes, media, or state institutions. HRE also enables shared responsibility. We're talking about partnerships also. Gender equality is not a women's issue alone. Human rights education brings in men and boys, government officials, and traditional and faith-based leaders, fostering understanding and co-ownership of equality and justice. In our committee's work, we've seen that states integrating HRE into gender policies often show progress, such as declines in intimate partner violence and increased men's engagement in care roles. This human rights education is not simply educational, it is liberatory. It transforms CEDAW and other UN treaties from a treaty into a lived reality. Coming to your question on if I can share some successful HRE initiatives, it is more on my CEDAW experience and my experience in Nepal as an activist that I can share some. Because many gender equality programs exist, but often without explicitly centering human rights education. However, when gender and human rights are combined, the transformation is more profound. So sharing some examples from Nepal, with the objective of localizing CEDAW in policy planning, one recent initiative capacitated local authorities and policymakers to integrate women's rights and the gender component more effectively in the annual provincial plans based on the CEDAW committee's concluding observation. And this strengthened the recognition and integration of women's human rights at the provincial and municipal levels and ensured budget allocation aligned with human rights obligations. In fact, I've just been engaged in the government of Nepal. It has now drafted a CEDAW roadmap to implement the CEDAW concluding observations issued, the concluding observation was issued this March this year. So there's this, human rights integrated approach throughout this process. Another example could be on the Women, Peace and Security agenda. When we advocated for the Women, Peace and Security agenda, as you know, in many conflicts, women are perceived as silent victims rather than active agents of change. And therefore, the integration of UN Security Council Resolution 1325 into local peace-building advocacy made visible the obligation of states to empower women in conflict resolution in many Asian countries, including my own country, Nepal. And this human rights framing helped ensure women's participation and leadership in peace processes, which might otherwise have been dismissed as non-essential or not important. Again, back to Nepal in regard to Domestic Violence Act, embedding human rights education in the implementation of the Domestic Violence Act reframed domestic violence from a private matter into a human rights violation. Training police, ward officials, and male leaders led to higher reporting rates and supportive community attitudes towards survivors. I'm a great advocate of engaging men and boys where I have seen visible impact. So engaging men and boys alliances globally and regionally have developed human rights education modules, particularly in Asia also I have seen. There are programs that bring young men and women together to discuss masculinity, consent, and bodily autonomy through a human rights education lens that have led not only to more equitable behaviors, but also to social ripple effects in communities. So in conclusion, what I want to say is the lesson is very, very clear. When human rights education is intentionally woven into gender programs, it deepens understanding, strengthens ownership, and sustains change. I'll end here. Thank you.
This is wonderful. Thank you so much, Bandana. That was just great. I wanted to segue into, because Elisa is now going to, bridge and go to the lived realities part of it and share the change makers. I'm going to hand the floor over to Elisa, but thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ivy, and thank you so much, Bushra and Vandana, for your presentations. So, as Ivy mentioned, as Sukakaka International, we would like to bring to this discussion a concrete project that we worked on together with the UN Office for Human Rights and Amnesty International, which is called Change Makers, Stories of Young Human Rights Educators. It's a multimedia educational tool that showcases stories of 7 young human rights educators from different countries and that address different thematics such as racism, disabilities, children's rights, and gender equality. So we thought today to show relevance with the human rights education and gender equality, the story of one of these wonderful young human rights educators, which is called Aizat Ruslanova from Kyrgyzstan, that uses arts as a medium for human rights education to advance women's rights and gender equality. So now, without speaking too much, I will leave the floor to maybe Kyoshi, if you can share the screen so we can see directly, watch with our eyes and listen really to this amazing young human rights educator. Thank you so much.
Привет, меня зовут Айзат Русланова, мне 25 лет, я живу в Кыргызстане, в городе Бишкек. И вот слова такие, как права человека, гендерное равенство или феминизм, они воспринимаются достаточно негативно, потому что это все кажется таким новым для Кыргызстана. И если женщины начинают говорить о правах, то у большей части общества складывается такое представление, что у женщин станет больше прав, чем у мужчин. На самом деле это так сложно объяснить. Я реализую разные образовательные проекты для подростков из разных регионов Кыргызстана, и мы с командой обучаем их тем вещам, которым обычно не обучают в школе. Мы где-то собираемся, проводим тренинги, изучаем, какие кейсы есть, и рассматриваем, как можно. Мы рассматриваем не только, что такое права человека или что ты можешь сделать в случае нарушения, а как можно исправить ситуацию, потому что, как я уже говорила, я больше работаю с девочками, женщинами, Почему? Потому что, к сожалению, у нас очень широко распространены гендерные стереотипы. Иногда неправильно преподносятся какие-то религиозные ценности, которые могут нарушать права женщин. Поэтому я стараюсь работать больше с девочками, женщинами, которые достаточно часто подвергаются гендерному насилию, испытывают на себе харассмент, просто идя днем по улице.
Меня зовут Камила, я из города Бишкек, Кыргызстан. Я учусь в 11 классе, в 83-й школе. Сейчас женщин очень сильно угнетают, и их не ставят ни во что. Из-за этого думаю, чтобы каждая женщина, каждая личность должна знать о своих правах вообще в общем. А в школах это учат, по-моему, чтобы ребенок развивался и знал свое право и смог постоять за себя.
Как я сказала раньше, не всегда эффективно, когда мы только говорим о правах человека, говорим о правах женщин, и потому что очень большой вызов заключается в том, как мы говорим. Возможно, мы говорим не на том языке, на котором нужно говорить. Возможно, мы не говорим на непонятном языке, на своем. И в этом очень сильно помогает искусство, потому что через искусство можно о многом рассказать и многое показать, то, что было непонятно. Вот это как раз инсталляция, она называется «Руки». И эту инсталляцию мы создавали вместе с сестренкой, она является художницей, а внутри находятся руки, 40 рук мужских. Как только дверь закрывается, здесь полутьма, аудиосопровождение, где человека внутри вот обзывают, и они такие очень дискриминационные ругательства, которые используются только для женщин. На самом деле очень страшная запись. Девушки, оказываясь в этой комнате, у них всплывали воспоминания, связанные и реакция некоторых очень сильно удивила в том плане, что они выходили и они говорили: знаете, что самое страшное? Страшно то, что я к этим словам привыкла. И заходили мужчины, которые, некоторые, зайдя и побыв здесь некоторое время, они выходили и говорили, что им было тяжело. Им было тяжело психологически, эмоционально, и они даже не представляли, что переживают девушки. Мы пытались через эту инсталляцию как раз рассказать, да, о том, что не расскажешь словами. Злость на то, что система, что государство не может защитить. Очень часто говорят, да, когда есть домашнее насилие в отношении женщин, женщина сама заслужила, женщина сама виновата. Но я не знаю, общество так не говорит в отношении мужчин, да, такое мнение только в отношении женщин, и это заставляет постоянно что-то делать для того, чтобы изменить ситуацию. Поэтому знание прав человека и обучение правам — это очень такой мощный инструмент. Сложно, и все это можно вместе сделать. Нас мало, но с каждым годом я замечаю, что нас становится больше. Это очень радует. Шире вот этот круг людей, которые обучают правам человека, которые помимо этого занимаются гражданским активизмом, делают какие-то вещи. Чем круг становится шире, тем становится как будто больше сил именно у тебя. Я горжусь, что я обучаю правам человека, потому что мы даем такой инструмент, очень крутой инструмент, с которым люди могут менять жизни людей, могут развивать свою страну.
Thank you so much, Aizat. So, I think we're tying all of it together, what Bushra said, and then Bandana, and now we're tying more examples. Michelle's going to share another example on HRE and gender equality. So I'm going to pass it to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Ivy, and thank you, Bashara, Bandana, Elisa, Aizrat, who was in the video. It's a great honor to be part of this panel alongside women like you, who bring such meaningful ideas and powerful projects. So I'm very happy. And I will ask Kiyoshi to help me with the presentation I have, just to share some pictures with you. As I was introduced, I'm the founder and executive director of Instituto Aurora for Human Rights Education, which is a Brazilian NGO founded in 2018. And since then, our mission is to promote and defend human rights education in Brazil. You can change to next slide, please. Kiyoshi, thank you. And what we do is aligned with the 2030 agenda. All our projects are aligned with the agenda. You can change, please. And over the next few minutes, I'd like to share 3 key lessons from the work we have been doing, which show how human rights education can drive gender equality in Brazil using both educational programs and advocacy strategies. And the first essential point for me to begin this presentation is to remember that the group we call women is diverse, with many groups in it. We differ in race, class, sexual orientation, disability, religion, and we must address intersectionality. While many of us experience common forms of violence and rights violations, each woman lives these experiences in a unique way. So the first lesson I'd like to share is understanding these differences is fundamental for human rights education to have a real and lasting impact. You can change, please, Kiyoshi. You can change once more. And as an example, I'd like to highlight the project called Mine, Yours, Our Vote, created by women from different organizations in Brazil and focused on first-time young voters. This project is being held in a context of polarization, us versus them idea, and also a movement to discourage young people from engaging in political participation, especially girls and women. So the project emphasizes that politics is also women's business, is also women's issue, that we need more feminist women in power, and that voting is an individual act and right with collective impact. And I'd like to share with you the story of these two young women, both named Gabriela. The first one, a girl from a low-income neighborhood, daughter of a Black mother and sister to an autistic boy, believed voting didn't change anything. But over the course of the project, she realized that if more people like her, or like her family, who care about those realities, were in power, maybe society could be different. So she decided to vote. And the second, Gabriela, a white girl from a wealthy background, already valued her vote, but believed she should vote based on her own interests. And during the project, she came to understand that voting should also consider the needs of others, especially the most vulnerable. And she said during the project that voting with others in mind is not charity. And she is right, it's not. What we see here is that the same project, designed with these girls' different backgrounds in mind, led them to different reflections, but to a shared purpose. And transformations like these only happen when the methodology, mostly in small groups, from what our experience is showing us, creates a deep emotional and social awakening about oneself, about others, and about who we are as a society. And this brings me to the second lesson I'd like to share. Please, Kiyoshi. How we teach matters, especially when it comes to sensitive topics like human rights and gender. Human rights education is not just content, like many women here said. It's a practice that invites people to truly see one another, to recognize and celebrate differences. And this emotional awakening must be supported by methodologies that supports it. At Instituto Aurora, we use methods that prioritize dialogue, active listening, and the sharing of life stories. This has helped many participants, in their own words, to step outside their bubbles, feel seen, gain confidence to talk about sensitive topics, or finally name what they didn't know how to articulate. And another example I'd like to share is the project called Reconnect. Please, Kiyoshi, you can change, which aims to prevent extreme violence against schools. So in Brazil, over the past decade, we have seen the rise of the far right here in our country. Along with it, a rise in hate speech, especially online and targeting women and minorities. Many extremist groups have focused on recruiting boys and not girls. This is important to say. And this violence often migrates from the internet and shows up in schools, where most teachers are women in our case. Many teachers report feeling afraid to address topics such as gender or sexuality in class, especially under political and religious pressure to silence these discussions. Our strategy is to support teachers, helping them build confidence and equipping them to recognize signs of radicalization so they can act to prevent it. We provide both in-depth materials that explain the big picture and also practical resources, such as a conversation guide and a glossary. And I want to emphasize that we need to take care of our girls and our boys when we talk about human rights education and gender equality. The narratives of hate being presented to these boys as an answer to their insecurities must be countered with real alternatives for belonging and meaning. And a critical, effective human rights education can offer a path to this, in our opinion. In this project, we partner with universities and other NGOs here in Brazil. Currently, we are working in collaboration with Brazil's Ministry of Education on a reissue of the glossary with the goal to distribute to schools across the country to support teachers. And here are some pictures of trainings in person, online, and some of materials. And I'd like to share right now the third lesson. You can change, thank you. The third lesson I'd like to share is that lasting cultural change only happens via networks. And that's why we participate in coalitions dedicated to promoting human rights, defending human rights education as a public policy, and advancing the gender equality agenda in Brazil. I believe it's important that we see networks as spaces for learning, where we can learn from one another about our rights and come to understand the struggles of groups we are not part of. We co-founded and actively participate in the Alliance for Women, a coalition of organizations and experts from across the country, including women living in the Amazon region, in the countryside, all working together to end violence against women. And within this coalition, we coordinate the Knowledge Working Group, which has already produced a guide on psychological violence against women directed at Brazil's National Congress as an advocacy tool. And recently, we held a meeting with more than 50 women from all regions of Brazil. And the goal was to identify priorities for the women's agenda and present them to the federal government during a national conference. You can change the slide, please. And out of 6 proposals developed, 5 focused on education. The inclusion of gender in the school's curriculum, gender literacy for members of the National Congress, and training for judges to conduct trials via a gender-sensitive lens. So human rights education truly is a way to advance gender equality. This is what we are saying, sharing here. And these Brazilian women are affirming this too, are saying that we need to focus on human rights education to advance this agenda of gender equality. And to conclude, I believe that to successfully drive cultural change with human rights education, we need first dialogue, always dialogue with society and with decision makers to foster empathy, to bridge, to build bridges between our distance. Second, to work in networks, because change only comes from cooperation with a shared purpose. And third, courage, to dream of the world we want to build, that it's not there already, but it can be. So thank you for your attention.
I love it. I love the words that you ended with, Michelle, with dialogue, network, and courage, especially with that courage at the end. So thank you very much, panelists. We have to actually wrap this up. The hour passes so fast. So thank you again, Bushra, Bandana, who had to leave already, Michelle, and Eliza. I'm going to turn to Pamela Morgan, who is a UN representative for Zonta International. She's also the co-chair of NGO Committee on the Status of Women New York. We wanted to hear her words as a respondent to what she heard today. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ivy. And it is my great honor to present with this illustrious group of activists. This topic is close to my heart. After a 35-year career as a public school educator, I've learned that education, whether it happens in a classroom, a community forum, or a quiet conversation, is the most powerful tool we have to build just and inclusive societies. Today, I'd like to respond on how today we've seen human rights education serve as both a bridge and a catalyst, connecting people from across divides and advancing gender equality as a cornerstone of social integration. At its heart, human rights education is not about only knowledge, it's about transformation. As people learn about the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, or CEDAW, they're not just learning history or policy, they're really learning empathy. They're learning to see themselves and others as equal bearers of dignity. In my own classrooms, I witnessed how even young people, once exposed to the principles of equality and justice, began to challenge stereotypes and question exclusionary norms. That shift from awareness to action is the beginning of social integration. Formal education systems play a critical role here, integrating human rights and gender equality into curricula that can shape generations who understand that inclusion is not charity, it's justice. But equally vital are informal spaces, community dialogues, networks, youth programs, and social movements where human rights principles come alive through lived experiences. These spaces allow men and women, boys and girls, to engage as partners in building equitable communities. Ultimately, human rights education invites us to imagine the world not as it is, but as it could be. A world where every person recognizes both their rights and their responsibilities towards others. When we teach human rights, we teach belonging. When we practice them, we build peace. Thank you.
Thank you, Pamela. As always, you're just beautifully said. I really like what you started with HRE as not just knowledge, but transformation. So true. I'd love to end with that, really. And so many other things, inclusion, not charity, justice, it's justice. And then thank you for adding the peace component at the end. I think human rights education is also about building the culture of peace. So with that, we would like to conclude. We really appreciate your presence with us. If you care to open your mic, videos, and say goodbye, please feel free to do that. We always like to hear your voices as we conclude. So thank you again to all the co-sponsors and OHCHR team. Thank you. So,
Thank you.
bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Thank you.
So many countries represented. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
Bye.
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 Bye. And from Iraq, Mohammed. Yeah. And Nazia.
Bye.
Bye-bye.